The weight of 40 pounds pressed into Harrison Pike's shoulders like a promise he had sworn to keep. But when he saw the orc woman sprawled among the rocks with blood pooling beneath her shattered leg, he dropped every ounce of it without a second thought. He had been climbing toward the survey station at the northern peak for 3 days, carrying specialized equipment that represented 6 months of his wages and the trust of the Frontier Mapping Commission. The instruments were delicate, irreplaceable, and essential for charting the mountain passes that would determine where the next wave of settlers could safely travel. His supervisor had made it abundantly clear that losing the gear meant losing his position, his reputation, and any hope of advancement. Yet Harrison found himself kneeling beside the injured woman, his hands already working to assess the damage, the expensive pack forgotten on the trail behind him. She was conscious but barely, her green skin pale with shock and her breathing shallow. One of her small tusks had chipped, probably when she fell, and blood trickled from a gash above her pointed ear. But it was her leg that made Harrison's stomach clench. The bone had broken through the skin just below her knee, white and terrible against the darker green of her flesh. She had tried to bind it with strips torn from her own tunic, but the makeshift bandage was soaked through. Her eyes snapped open when his shadow fell across her, and despite her obvious agony she tried to pull away. "Stay back," she growled, the words coming through gritted teeth. "I have nothing worth stealing." "I am not here to steal," Harrison said quietly, keeping his hands visible. "I am a surveyor, not a bandit. You are badly hurt," she laughed, a bitter sound that turned into a gasp of pain. "And you think I do not know that? Go on your way, human. Leave me to my fate. Your fate does not have to be dying alone on this mountain." He was already pulling his water skin from his belt, along with the clean cloth he kept for wiping his instruments. "I have some medical training. Field medicine, anyway. Please let me help you." "Why?" The question came out sharp and suspicious. "Why would you help an orc?" Harrison met her eyes, seeing the mixture of pain and pride there. "Because you are hurt and I can do something about it. That is reason enough." For a long moment she just stared at him, as if searching for the lie, the trick, the hidden cruelty. Then, perhaps because she truly had no other option, she gave a tiny nod. He worked quickly, knowing that time mattered. The wound was already hours old based on the dried blood around the edges. He cleaned it as gently as he could, though she went rigid with pain, biting down on her own hand to keep from crying out. The leg needed to be set, and that would be even worse. "What is your name?" he asked, partly to distract her and partly because he needed to know. "Greshka," she said after a hesitation. "Greshka of the Stone Creek clan, or I was until they cast me out." "Why did they cast you out?" Her jaw tightened. "Because I spoke against raiding human settlements, because I said we should seek peace instead of revenge. My clan called me a traitor and a coward." She looked away, toward the jagged peaks above them. "I was traveling to the eastern valleys, where I heard there were orcs who felt as I do. Then I slipped on loose scree and fell." Harrison absorbed this as he prepared the splint from straight branches and his spare shirt. "I am Harrison, Harrison Pike, and for what it is worth, I do not think speaking for peace makes you a coward. You would be alone in that opinion among both my people and yours." He could not argue with that. The war between humans and orcs had been going on for generations, an endless cycle of raids and reprisals that left both sides bitter and bleeding. Harrison himself had lost an uncle to an orc attack when he was 12. But he had also seen orc villages burned by human militias, had walked through the ashes and wondered how this served anyone. "This is going to hurt," he warned her. "I need to set the bone before I can splint it." Greshka nodded, her face already drawn with dread. "Do it." The procedure was brutal despite his care. She did scream then, a sound that echoed off the mountain walls and sent birds scattering from their roosts. Harrison worked as fast as he dared, aligning the bone and securing the splint tightly. By the time he finished, Greshka had passed out, which was probably a mercy. He sat back on his heels, breathing hard, his hands trembling with adrenaline. Then he looked up at the sky. The sun was already past its zenith, sinking toward the western peaks. He had maybe 4 hours of good daylight left, not nearly enough to reach the survey station and return before dark. And Greshka could not be moved, not safely, not today. The decision formed itself without conscious thought. He retrieved his abandoned pack, dragged it down to where Greshka lay, and began setting up a camp. His tent was small but sturdy, designed for 1 person but sufficient for 2 if they did not mind being cramped. He erected it in the lee of a large boulder that would provide some shelter from the wind, then carefully moved Greshka inside, doing his best not to jostle her injured leg. She stirred but did not wake, which worried him. Shock was dangerous. An infection was nearly inevitable with a compound fracture exposed to the mountain dirt. Harrison built a fire as the shadows lengthened, then boiled water and used some of his precious tea leaves to make a strong brew. When Greshka finally woke, shivering and disoriented, he helped her sit up enough to drink it. "Where?" she mumbled, looking around in confusion. "Still on the mountain. I made camp. You cannot travel yet." She focused on him with difficulty, her pupils slightly uneven. "Your supplies." "You said you were a surveyor. You have a job to do. It can wait." "That is foolish. You should leave me." "I am not leaving you," Harrison said firmly. "Now drink this. You need to stay warm." She drank, her hands shaking so badly that he had to hold the cup for her. When she finished, she slumped back against the rolled blanket he had positioned as a pillow. "You are going to regret this kindness. Maybe, but I would regret leaving you more." She closed her eyes, and he thought she might have fallen asleep again, but then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." He stayed awake most of that night, keeping the fire going and checking on Greshka every hour. She was feverish by midnight, her skin hot to the touch despite the mountain cold. Harrison used water from the nearby stream to cool her forehead and keep her hydrated, all while trying not to think about the expensive surveying equipment sitting useless in his pack, or the job he was supposed to be doing, or the consequences he would face. When dawn came gray and reluctant over the peaks, Greshka's fever had broken, leaving her weak but lucid. "You stayed," she said, as if surprised to find him still there. "Of course I stayed. Your job will still be there, or it will not. Either way, I made my choice." She studied him with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "You are strange, Harrison Pike." He smiled despite his exhaustion. "I have been told that before." Over the next 3 days, they fell into an unlikely routine. Harrison hunted for small game, foraged for edible plants, and maintained the camp. Greshka slept fitfully, battling the fever that came and went in waves. When she was lucid, they talked. She told him about growing up in the Stone Creek clan, about learning to track and hunt in the dense forests of the borderlands. She spoke of her mother, who had been a warrior of great renown, and her father, who had died in a raid against a human fortress when Greshka was young. She described the slow disillusionment that had grown in her as she watched the cycle of violence claim more and more of her people, until she could no longer stay silent. "They called me a traitor at the gathering," she said, staring at the tent ceiling. "My own mother would not meet my eyes. They gave me until dawn to leave or face execution, so I left." "That took courage," Harrison said, "or it was cowardice. I still do not know which. Speaking an unpopular truth is never cowardice. Trust me, I know something about that." He told her about his own past. about growing up in a border settlement where hatred of orcs was as natural as breathing. He described the moment when he was 16 and saw a human militia drag an orc woman and her children from their home, how he had watched them burn the dwelling and drive the family into the wilderness at spear point, how he had done nothing, said nothing, been too afraid to act. "I joined the mapping commission to get away from that place," he admitted. "I thought if I could help chart new territories, maybe people could spread out, have room to breathe without fighting over every scrap of land. I thought distance might bring peace where proximity brought war." "And has it?" Greshka asked. "No, people carry their hatreds with them wherever they go." "Yes," she agreed softly. "They do." On the fourth day, Greshka's leg showed the first signs of infection. The skin around the wound was red and swollen, and she was burning with fever again. Harrison knew he needed to make a decision. They were still 2 days from the nearest settlement, a small frontier town called Miller's Rest. If he tried to carry her there, he might kill her from the jostling alone. But if he did nothing, the infection would certainly kill her. "I need to go for help," he told her that evening. "I can reach Miller's Rest in a day if I push hard. I will bring back a wagon and proper medical supplies." "They will not help an orc," Greshka said, her voice dull with fever. "They will more likely form a hunting party." "Then I will not tell them you are an orc. I will say you are my wife, injured in a climbing accident," she laughed weakly. "A human with an orc wife. That is not any more believable. Then I will lie better. The point is, I am getting you help. Why do you care so much?" The question came out frustrated, almost angry. "You do not know me. I am nothing to you." Harrison was quiet for a moment, arranging his thoughts. "When I saw you lying there in the rocks, dying alone, I thought about all the times I should have done something and did not. All the cruelties I witnessed and walked past. I thought about my uncle who died hating orcs, and the orc family I watched being driven from their home, and how the world just keeps grinding people up in this war that nobody wins. And I thought, not this time. This time I do the right thing, whatever it costs me." Greshka's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You are a fool, probably, but I am a fool who is going to save your life, so you will have to tolerate it." He left before dawn, carrying only water and a bit of food, leaving everything else with Greshka, including his knife and his fire-starting kit. He moved fast despite his fatigue, driven by the knowledge that every hour mattered. The journey down the mountain was a blur of scrambling over rocks and pushing through scrub brush. He reached Miller's Rest as the sun was setting, stumbling into the small town with bloody hands and exhaustion dragging at every step. The doctor was a gruff older man named Sims who took one look at Harrison and sat him down. "What in blazes happened to you, son?" "My wife," Harrison gasped out between gulps of water. "Climbing accident. Broken leg, compound fracture. 4 days ago. She is infected. I need supplies, a wagon." "Where is she?" Harrison described the location as precisely as his surveyor's training allowed. Dr. Sims listened, his weathered face grave. "That is a hard journey for someone in her condition. We should leave at first light, give the horses rest." "No, now, please. She does not have time." Something in Harrison's voice must have convinced him, because the doctor nodded. "All right. Let me gather what I need. You go to the stable, tell Marcus I sent you for the cart and the 2 bay geldings. And for God's sake, eat something before you fall over." 2 hours later, they were climbing back up the mountain trail by lantern light, the cart rattling over the rough ground. Harrison had managed to choke down some bread and dried meat, though his stomach was in knots. Dr. Sims had brought an assistant, a young man named Peter who looked uncomfortable with the whole midnight expedition, but did not complain. They reached the camp near dawn. Greshka was worse, her breathing labored and her fever raging. Dr. Sims took one look at her and went very still. "That is an orc," he said flatly. "That is my wife," Harrison replied, meeting his eyes steadily. "And she is dying. Are you going to help her or not?" The doctor stared at him for a long moment. Peter had gone pale, his hand drifting toward the hatchet at his belt. Then Dr. Sims sighed, a sound full of weariness and resignation. "Peter, start unpacking. And put that damned hatchet away before you hurt yourself." "But sir, she is a patient, and I took an oath." "Now move." What followed was hours of tense, careful work. Dr. Sims cleaned the wound properly, removing dead tissue and packing it with poultices that smelled of honey and strange herbs. He reset the splint with professional efficiency and dosed Greshka with something that made her sleep deeply. "Infection is bad," he said to Harrison when he finished. "But I have seen worse. If the fever breaks in the next day or two, she will probably live. Probably. No promises." "Thank you," Harrison said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. The doctor packed up his supplies, looking thoughtful. "What are you going to do now?" "You cannot bring her to town. People see an orc, they do not stop to ask questions." "I know. I will stay here until she can travel, then we will go somewhere else." "Your surveying job," Harrison glanced at the pack that still held all his expensive, unused equipment. "I suppose I do not have one anymore." Dr. Sims grunted. "Probably not. That was costly heroism, son. She is worth it." The doctor studied him, then shook his head with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "I will check back in 3 days, see how she is healing. In the meantime, keep the wound clean and make sure she drinks. Here." He handed over a packet of herbs. "Willow bark tea for the pain and fever. Use it sparingly." They left as the sun climbed higher, the cart disappearing down the trail. Harrison sat beside Greshka, exhausted beyond measure but unable to sleep. He watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest like a miser counting coins. She woke that evening, clearer-eyed than she had been in days. "You came back," she said. "Of course I came back." "The doctor saw me, saw what I am." "Yes, but he helped me anyway." "Yes." She was quiet for a while, processing this. "I do not understand your people. Most days, neither do I." The fever broke on the second day after the doctor's visit, and Greshka began to recover in earnest. She was weak, her legs still painful and immobilized, but the crisis had passed. When Dr. Sims returned as promised, he declared himself satisfied with her progress. "She will need to stay off that leg for at least 2 months," he said. "Possibly 3, and she will likely always have a limp. But she will walk again." After he left, Greshka looked at Harrison with an expression he could not quite read. 2 months. You cannot stay on this mountain for 2 months. Why not? It is nearly summer, the weather will hold. You have a life, a job, or you did." Harrison shrugged. "I made my choice when I dropped that pack. I do not regret it. You should. You sacrificed everything for someone you barely know." "Maybe I wanted to know you better," he said, and was surprised to realize it was true. Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes. "You are impossible. So I have been told." They settled into a new routine over the following weeks. Harrison expanded the camp, building a more permanent shelter from branches and his waterproof tarp. He hunted and foraged with increasing skill, and Greshka taught him which plants were safe and which would kill him, which animal tracks meant good hunting and which meant danger. She could not walk, but she could teach, and she seemed to take a certain satisfaction in educating him. "You move through the forest like a drunk bear," she told him one afternoon, her tone somewhere between exasperation and amusement. "Every animal for miles knows you are coming. I am a surveyor, not a hunter. You are a walking disaster is what you are. Here, watch." She demonstrated from her seated position how to test the ground before putting weight on it, how to move with the wind instead of against it, how to read the small signs that revealed the forest's secrets. "Better," she said when he tried again. "You now move like a sober bear." "I will take that as progress." As the days passed, Harrison found himself watching Greshka more than the forest. He noticed the way she smiled when she thought he was not looking, the quick grace of her hands as she worked on small projects, the surprising gentleness in her voice when she spoke of things she loved. He learned that she had a gift for carving, creating small figurines from bits of wood with just his knife and her patient skill. He discovered that she sang sometimes, low songs in the Orcish language that sounded like wind through canyons. And he realized with a feeling like falling that he was in love with her. It was a foolish, impossible thing. She was an orc, he was human, and the world had no place for what he was feeling. But the heart, Harrison was learning, did not much care about practicality. Greshka seemed to sense the change in him, the way his eyes lingered, the careful way he avoided touching her even casually. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she spoke into the silence between them. "You look at me differently now." Harrison felt his face heat. "I am sorry. I do not mean to make you uncomfortable." "I did not say it made me uncomfortable. I said you look at me differently." She paused. "I look at you differently too." His heart hammered against his ribs. "How do you look at me?" "Like you are something I did not expect. Something I did not know I wanted." She met his eyes across the fire. "Something I am afraid to want." "Why afraid?" "Because this cannot end well, Harrison. You know that as well as I do. Your people hate mine. Mine hate yours. We are living in a moment out of time up here on this mountain, but eventually we will have to return to the world, and when we do—" She trailed off, her expression bleak. "When we do, we will face it together," Harrison said. "If you want to, that is. Want to." She laughed, but it sounded pained. "I have spent every day of the past month trying not to want to, trying to remember all the reasons this is a terrible idea. But then you smile at me, or tell one of your ridiculous stories, or look at me like I am something precious, and I forget why I was supposed to resist." Harrison moved around the fire, slowly enough that she could tell him to stop if she wanted. She did not. He knelt beside her, close enough to see the firelight reflected in her eyes. "I love you," he said simply. "I did not plan to. I did not even know it was happening until it was too late. But I love you, Greshka of the Stone Creek clan, and I do not care if it is impossible or foolish or doomed. I love you." For a moment she just stared at him, her breath catching. Then she reached out with one hand and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "I love you too," she whispered. "Creator, help me, I love you too." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, and she kissed him back with a fierce tenderness that made his breath stop. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying. "What do we do now?" she asked. "I do not know, but we will figure it out." They held each other as the fire burned down to embers, the mountain night settling around them like a blessing. The next weeks passed in a strange, suspended happiness. They were careful with each other, learning the shape of this new thing between them. Greshka's leg healed slowly but steadily, and she began to put weight on it, first with Harrison's support, and then with the crutch he fashioned from a forked branch. "I will be walking on my own soon," she said one morning, watching the sunrise from outside their shelter. "And then we will need to decide what comes next. We could stay here," Harrison offered, though he knew it was not realistic. "Build a cabin, live off the land. For how long? A season? A year? Eventually winter would drive us down, or we would run out of supplies, or someone would find us. This place is a dream, Harrison. We cannot live in a dream forever." He knew she was right. They were living on borrowed time, surviving on what the mountain provided and what remained of his supplies. More than that, they were isolated, cut off from everything and everyone. It was peaceful, but it was not a life. The Eastern Valleys, he said, remembering. You said you heard there were orcs there who wanted peace. Maybe we could go there. Greshka considered this. Maybe. But even the peace clans would look at us strangely, a human and an orc together. It is not something they would easily accept. Is there anywhere we would be accepted? She was quiet for a long time. I do not know. Perhaps we have to make our own place. The idea took root in Harrison's mind over the following days. Make their own place. It sounded impossible, but so had surviving on this mountain. So had loving an orc woman. So had everything that had happened since he dropped his surveying equipment without a second thought. When Dr. Sims made his final visit 6 weeks after he had first climbed up the mountain, he found them sitting together, Greshka's leg splinted but healing well, both of them looking healthier than he had expected. Well, he said, examining the injury with professional thoroughness, you beat the odds, the bone set cleanly. You will limp, like I said, but you will walk. Thank you, Greshka said with a sincerity that made the old doctor look uncomfortable. Yes, well, that is my job. He paused. What are your plans now? Harrison and Greshka exchanged glances. They had been discussing this for days, weighing options, arguing possibilities. We are going to travel west, Harrison said. To the frontier territories past the settlements, find a piece of unclaimed land and homestead it. Dr. Sims raised an eyebrow. That is rough country, hard living. Harder than this. Harrison gestured at their mountain camp, Fairpoint. The doctor began packing his supplies. You know people will not leave you alone out there. If they find you, if they see what she is, there will be trouble. We know, Greshka said quietly, but what choice do we have? We cannot live among humans and we cannot live among orcs, so we will live apart and hope that is enough. The doctor studied them both, then sighed. You are either the bravest people I have ever met or the most foolish. I have not decided which. He handed Harrison a package. Supplies, bandages, medicine, some seeds for planting. Do not thank me, he added when Harrison started to speak. I am just covering my conscience. But if you are going to do this damned fool thing, you might as well do it properly. He left shaking his head, but Harrison thought he saw something like respect in the old man's eyes. They departed the mountain 3 days later. Greshka could walk with her crutch, slowly and with obvious pain, but she could walk. Harrison divided his remaining supplies between 2 packs, leaving the surveying equipment behind. It belonged to another life. Another Harrison who had believed his purpose was mapping mountains for the Frontier Commission. You regret it? Greshka asked as they made their way down the trail. Losing your job, your future, all of it. Harrison looked at her, this strong, brave woman who had changed everything simply by needing help. Not for a single moment. The journey west took weeks. They moved slowly because of Greshka's injury, staying off the main roads and avoiding settlements. Harrison traded some of his remaining supplies at isolated farmsteads for food and information. Always claiming Greshka was his wife recovering from an accident. Always moving on before people could look too closely. They crossed mountains and valleys, forded streams swollen with snowmelt, walked through forests so thick the sun barely touched the ground. Greshka's leg grew stronger, and she eventually abandoned the crutch, though she still limped. Harrison learned the skills she taught him, becoming something closer to competent in wilderness survival. And at night, when they made camp, they held each other and talked about the future they were building with nothing but hope and stubbornness. I want a garden, Greshka said one evening. A big one with vegetables and herbs and maybe chickens. Chickens are good, Harrison agreed. I can build a coop and a cabin. A real one with a stone fireplace and windows. Windows, you have ambitious dreams, surveyor, former surveyor. And yes, I do. I dream of a place that is ours, where nobody can tell us we do not belong. She kissed him softly. I dream of that too. They found their place in late summer, in a valley so remote that Harrison could not even locate it on his maps. A stream cut through it, providing clear water year-round. The land was good, with fertile soil and plenty of game. There were no roads, no settlements, nothing but wilderness in every direction. "This is it," Greshka said, looking around with wonder. "This is where we make our stand." They built their cabin log by log, working through the long summer days. Harrison had a surveyor's precision and some carpentry skills learned in his youth. Greshka had strength despite her injury, and an orc's practical knowledge of construction. Together they raised walls, fitted roof beams, and chinked gaps with clay from the stream bank. It was hard work, the kind that left them exhausted and sore every night. But it was their work, building something that belonged to them alone. By the time the first leaves began to turn, they had a cabin with a stone fireplace, 2 real windows fitted with oiled paper, and a door that closed properly. It was small and rough, but it was home. Greshka planted a garden even as autumn arrived, putting in cold weather crops that would give them fresh food through the fall. Harrison hunted and fished, smoking meat for the winter. They gathered firewood, stacking it high against the cabin wall. They prepared for the hard months ahead with the focus of people who knew their survival depended on getting it right. And somewhere in the midst of all that work, they built a life. One evening in early autumn, as they sat by their fireplace watching the flames dance, Harrison took Greshka's hand. "Marry me," he said. She turned to him, her eyes wide. "What, marry me? I know we cannot do it in a town with a priest and witnesses. I know it will not be recognized by any law, but marry me anyway. Declare yourself mine and let me declare myself yours. Make this official, at least between us." Greshka's eyes filled with tears. "You want to marry an orc? Truly, I want to marry you. The fact that you are an orc is part of who you are, and I love every part of you, so yes, truly." She kissed him fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Harrison Pike. I will be your wife in the eyes of the Creator and anyone else who cares to ask." They married themselves the next day in their small cabin, with no witnesses but the forest around them. Harrison spoke the words he remembered from human wedding ceremonies, promising to love and honor and cherish. Greshka spoke vows in Orcish that she translated, promising to stand beside him in strength and in weakness, in peace and in conflict, until death parted them. They had no rings, so they exchanged small tokens instead. Harrison gave her a carving he had made, crude but sincere, of 2 figures standing together. Greshka gave him a bracelet woven from leather and decorated with beads she had painstakingly crafted from wood and stone. "I love you," Harrison said, slipping the bracelet onto his wrist. "I love you too," Greshka replied, holding her wooden carving like it was made of gold. They spent that night wrapped in each other's arms, married by their own decree if no one else's, and it felt more real and binding than any ceremony in a stone church could have been. Winter came hard and early, blanketing their valley in snow. They huddled together in their cabin, burning through their woodpile and living on the food they had preserved. It was a hard season, with days when the cold was so bitter they barely left the warmth of their bed, but they survived it together. In the spring, Dr. Sims found them. Harrison was checking his snares when he saw the old man riding up the valley on a sturdy mule. He felt a jolt of fear, wondering if the doctor had brought others, if their hiding place had been compromised. But Sims was alone, and when he dismounted, he looked more curious than hostile. "Heard rumors of a hermit living out this way," the doctor said by way of greeting. "Thought I would check if it was you. Just me and my wife," Harrison said carefully, living quietly, bothering no one. Wife visit made it official, did you? As official as we could. Dr. Sims grunted. Well, I brought supplies, medicine, some seeds I thought you might use. Consider it payment for satisfying my curiosity. Greshka emerged from the cabin, limping slightly but moving with confidence. She looked at the doctor warily. You traveled far to satisfy curiosity. Maybe I was worried, Sims said gruffly. Maybe I wanted to make sure that fool boy had not gotten himself killed. Or maybe I just needed to see if this impossible thing you two are attempting could actually work. And what is your conclusion? Harrison asked. The doctor looked around at the cabin, the garden plot already showing green shoots, the well-maintained clearing. He looked at Harrison and Greshka standing together, shoulder to shoulder, facing him with a united front. My conclusion, he said slowly, is that impossible things happen more often than people think, and that maybe the world could use more impossible things. He stayed for a day, sharing news from the settlements and checking on Greshka's leg, which had healed remarkably well. When he left, he promised to visit again if they did not mind. We would welcome it, Harrison said, and meant it. True to his word, Dr. Sims returned the next spring and the spring after that. He became their occasional link to the outside world, bringing supplies and news, asking nothing in return except to see that they were still thriving through him. They learned that the war between humans and orcs continued, that settlements expanded and conflicts flared. But that felt distant, like storms on a far horizon. In their valley they had peace. Years passed. Harrison and Greshka built additions to their cabin, cleared more land for farming, and established a life that was hard but satisfying. They were never truly free of the threat of discovery, never able to relax completely, but they were together, and that made everything bearable. On a spring morning 5 years after they had first arrived in the valley, Greshka told Harrison she was pregnant. He stared at her in shock. Is that even possible? Human and orc? Apparently it is, she said, laughing at his expression. Rare, maybe, but possible. The pregnancy was difficult and they both worried constantly. But Dr. Sims, when he arrived for his annual visit and learned the news, reassured them as best he could. I have heard of such children, he said. They usually favor one parent or the other, but they can be healthy, strong even. Of course, they face their own challenges. Challenges, Harrison repeated. You mean hatred from both sides. That too. But I meant more practical things, like being neither fully human nor fully orc. They will have to forge their own identity. They will not be the first to do so, Greshka said, resting a hand on her swelling belly. Their parents have already blazed that trail. Their daughter was born on a cold winter night, with Dr. Sims attending the birth and Harrison pacing a trench in the cabin floor. The labor was long and painful, and Harrison felt every moment of Greshka's suffering like a knife to his own heart. But finally, as dawn broke over the snowy valley, a baby's cry split the air. She was perfect, with green-tinged skin lighter than Greshka's but darker than Harrison's, tiny tusks that would grow more prominent with age, and her father's bright blue eyes. They named her Helena, after Harrison's grandmother, and with a sound that worked in Orcish as well as human tongue. She is beautiful, Harrison whispered, cradling his daughter with trembling hands. She is ours, Greshka said, exhausted but smiling, and she will be strong. Raising Helena in the wilderness was its own adventure. She grew quickly, displaying the vigor of her orc heritage and the curiosity of her human side. By the time she was 3, she was climbing trees and tracking animals with a skill that amazed Harrison. By 5, she was helping in the garden and learning to read from the few books Dr. Sims brought. She is going to be a force of nature, the doctor observed, watching Helena chase butterflies with single-minded determination. I pity anyone who tries to tell that child what she cannot do. She gets that from her mother, Harrison said proudly. And her father, Greshka added, smiling at him. As Helena grew, Harrison and Greshka made sure she knew where she came from. They taught her about both human and orc cultures, the good and the bad. They told her honestly about the prejudice she would face if she ever left the valley, but also about the courage it took to build something new in the face of hatred. Why do humans and orcs hate each other? Helena asked one evening when she was 7, her young face troubled. Harrison exchanged glances with Greshka, then said, "Because fear is easier than understanding. Because people remember old hurts and forget that everyone is just trying to survive and protect what they love. Because changing how things have always been is hard, and most people choose the easy path. But you and Mama chose the hard path." "Yes, we did." "Why?" Greshka pulled her daughter close. "Because some things are worth the difficulty. Love is worth it. Family is worth it. Peace is worth it. We chose to believe that, even when the whole world said we were wrong." Helena absorbed this with the seriousness of childhood. "When I grow up, I want to choose the hard path too." "I hope you will not have to," Harrison said gently. "I hope the world will be kinder to you than it was to us." But he knew, even as he said it, that it was unlikely. The world changed slowly, if at all. When Helena was 10, they had visitors for the first time beyond Dr. Sims. A small group of orcs traveling east in search of the peace clans stumbled upon the valley. Harrison saw them first and felt his blood run cold, but Greshka went to meet them without fear. They were wary at first, hands on their weapons, eyes scanning for a trap. But Greshka spoke to them in Orcish, rapid and confident, and slowly they relaxed. "This is my husband," she said, gesturing to Harrison who had joined her, Helena peeking out from behind him. "And this is my daughter. We live here in peace. You are welcome to rest and take supplies before you continue your journey." The orcs stared at Harrison, then at Helena, then at Greshka like she had sprouted a second head. "You married a human," one of them said, disbelief and disgust warring in his voice. "I love a human," Greshka corrected firmly. "I chose a human, and I have never regretted it." Another orc, a woman with scars across her face and a more thoughtful expression, spoke up. "We heard rumors of an orc woman who lived with a human in the western wilderness. We thought it was a story, something to scare children. But it is true." "It is true," Greshka agreed. "Does that trouble you?" The scarred woman looked at Harrison, at Helena, at the cabin and garden and the life they had built. "It troubles me," she said slowly, "that I cannot decide if you are the bravest orc I have met or the most foolish." "I have been told I am both," Greshka said with a slight smile. They let the orcs camp in their valley for 3 days, sharing food and stories. The visitors were traveling to the eastern peace clans after their own tribe had fragmented over disputes about the endless war. They looked at Harrison and Greshka's life with a mixture of bewilderment and something that might have been envy. "You really make it work," the scarred woman said on the last evening. "Against all odds, you built something here." "We did," Harrison agreed. "It has not been easy. But it has been worth it." When the orcs left, they did so with respect if not full understanding. The scarred woman clasped Greshka's arm in the orcish gesture of honor. "You are not a traitor, Greshka of Stone Creek. You are a pioneer. May the Creator guard your path." After they disappeared into the forest, Helena tugged on Harrison's hand. "Papa, do you think more people will find us? Maybe. Probably, eventually. And will they all leave peacefully?" Harrison looked at his daughter's worried face and decided she deserved honesty. "Probably not all of them. But we will face whatever comes, just like we always have." The years continued their steady march. Helena grew into a strong, intelligent young woman who moved between human and orc mannerisms with fluid grace. Dr. Sims visited less frequently as age slowed him down, but his son began making the journey instead, continuing the connection. When Helena was 16, she came to her parents with a question that Harrison had been dreading. "I want to see the world beyond the valley," she said. "I want to know what is out there. I want to see human towns and orc clans and everything else you have told me about." Harrison felt his heart clench with fear. "The world is not kind to people like us, like you. I know, you have told me, but I also know that hiding here forever is not living. It is just existing." She looked between her parents with determination. "You both chose to face the world. You chose to build something new instead of accepting what you were given. I want that same choice." Greshka reached out and took her daughter's hand. "You are right. We cannot keep you here forever and we should not want to. But promise us you will be careful. Promise us you will come home." "I promise," Helena said solemnly. They prepared her as best they could, teaching her how to navigate between worlds, how to hide her mixed heritage when necessary, how to defend herself if hiding was not enough. And then, on a bright spring morning, they watched her walk out of the valley with a pack on her back and hope in her heart. "She will be all right," Greshka said, more to reassure herself than Harrison. "She is strong, like her mother, and stubborn, like her father." They held each other and watched until Helena disappeared from view, then returned to their cabin to wait and worry and hope. Helena came back 6 months later, thin and scarred and changed. She had seen human cities where orcs were hunted on sight. She had visited orc clans who had threatened her life for her mixed blood. She had also found pockets of people, both human and orc, who were working toward peace, who believed a different world was possible. "It is getting better," she told her parents around the fire that night. "Slowly, so slowly you can barely see it, but there are people out there who think like you, who want peace. You were not alone, you just had to blaze the trail first." Harrison felt tears in his eyes. "So it was worth it, all of it." "It was worth it," Helena confirmed. "You proved that humans and orcs could love each other, could build a life together. You gave people like me a chance to exist. That matters, Papa. That matters so much." Helena settled back into valley life, but she made regular trips beyond it now, serving as a bridge between worlds. She carried messages between peace-minded humans and orcs, helped negotiate trade agreements, and slowly, painstakingly, helped weave a network of people who wanted something better than endless war. Years passed. Harrison's hair went gray, then white. Greshka's limp grew more pronounced as old injuries caught up with her. But they were still together, still in their valley, still proving every day that love could cross any divide. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Harrison and Greshka sat outside their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked, the same question Greshka had once asked him. "Choosing this life with me?" Greshka turned to him, her green face lined with age but her eyes still bright. "Not for a single heartbeat, you. Never. Not when I dropped that surveying equipment, not through all the hard years, never." "It was 40 pounds of gear," Greshka said, a smile tugging at her lips. "Expensive equipment, your whole career." "It was nothing," Harrison said firmly. "Compared to you, it was nothing. I left it on that mountain without blinking, and I would do it again 1,000 times over." She kissed him softly. "My impossible human, my brave orc." They sat together as the stars emerged. Two people who had built a life from nothing but love and stubbornness, who had raised a daughter to change the world, who had proved that even the deepest divisions could be bridged by those willing to try. Their valley remained peaceful. Their love remained strong. And though the world beyond their borders still struggled with hatred and fear, here in this small corner of wilderness. Two hearts beat as one, proof that impossible things could not only happen but could last. Helena joined them as full darkness fell, bringing tea and sitting at their feet like she had as a child. "I have news from the Eastern clans," she said. "They want to establish a formal peace council with representatives from both human and orc communities. They asked if you would come speak about your experiences." Harrison and Greshka exchanged glances, a whole conversation happening in that look. "We are old," Greshka said slowly. "Travel would be hard." "But not impossible," Harrison added. "And if it would help if our story could make a difference." "Then we should go," Greshka finished. "One last adventure." Helena grinned. "I knew you would say yes." They made the journey east that autumn, traveling slowly but steadily. Helena guided them, and along the way they met people who had heard the legend of the human surveyor and the orc woman who had built a life in the wilderness. To Harrison's surprise, they were greeted with respect, curiosity, and hope. The Peace Council convened in a clearing on the border between human and orc territories, a temporary gathering place where neither side held dominance. Hundreds attended, some skeptical, some hopeful, all curious. Harrison and Greshka stood before them, an old human man and an old orc woman, holding hands like they had faced everything else in their lives. 25 years ago, Harrison began, his voice carrying across the clearing, "I found an injured orc woman on a mountain. I could have left her to die. Most people would have, but I chose to help her, and that choice changed my life. I had been cast out by my clan for speaking of peace," Greshka continued. "I had lost everything, but this human man gave me back my life and then gave me his heart. I learned that enemies can become friends, and friends can become family." They told their story, the full truth of it, holding nothing back. The struggles and the joys, the fear and the love, the daughter who carried the best of both worlds in her blood. They spoke of the life they had built, alone in the wilderness, and how that loneliness had been worth it for the freedom to love. When they finished, the clearing was silent. Then an old orc warrior stood, scars covering his body, tears running down his face. "I have killed humans," he said, his voice rough. "I have hated humans my whole life, but I see you too, and I think, what if I had made different choices? What if we all had?" He looked around at the gathered crowd. "Maybe it is time we did." A human woman rose next, her expression pained. "My husband died in an orc raid. I swore I would hate them forever, but my hatred has only brought me more pain. Perhaps it is time to try something else." One by one, people stood. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. Enough to say that maybe, possibly, the world could change. That maybe Harrison and Greshka's impossible love was not an isolated miracle, but the first bloom of something larger. The Peace Council did not solve everything. Centuries of hatred could not be undone in a day or a season or a year. But it was a beginning, and beginnings mattered. Harrison and Greshka returned to their valley as winter approached, exhausted but satisfied. They had done what they could. The rest was up to others. They spent that winter much as they had spent the first, huddled together against the cold, but now with the warmth of knowing they had made a difference. Spring brought Dr. Sims's grandson with news that the Peace Council was reconvening, that trade agreements were being negotiated, that slowly, carefully, humans and orcs were learning to coexist. "You started something," the young doctor said. "You too, just by loving each other, changed the world." "We just lived our lives," Greshka protested. "That is how most great things start," he replied. Harrison Pike died peacefully 5 years later in the cabin he had built, with Greshka holding his hand and Helena at his side. His last words were, "Best choice I ever made." Greshka followed him 3 winters after that, slipping away in her sleep with a smile on her face, her daughter keeping vigil. They were buried side by side in the valley they had claimed, under a marker Helena carved with the words, "Here lie 2 people who chose love over hate and changed the world." Their story lived on, told around fire bases in both human and orc communities, a reminder that peace was possible, that love could bridge any divide, that sometimes the impossible was simply waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to try. Helena continued their work, living long enough to see the first permanent peace settlements, places where humans and orcs lived side by side without fear. She raised her own children, who carried their grandparents' legacy forward into a world that was slowly, painfully, learning to be better. And in a quiet valley in the western wilderness, 2 graves stood side by side under the whispering pines, marking the place where an impossible love had taken root and changed everything. The cabin still stood, maintained by Helena and her children as a memorial and a reminder. On the door, carved in both human and orc script, were the words Harrison had spoken so many years ago. "Not for a single moment would I regret it." And that, perhaps, was the truest measure of their love. Not that it was easy or accepted or even entirely safe, but that given the choice again, with full knowledge of all the hardship it would bring, they would choose each other every single time. The world did not transform overnight. Peace remained fragile, prejudice remained real, and the work of bridging ancient divides continued long after Harrison and Greshka were gone. But they had proved it was possible. They had lived the answer to the question everyone claimed had no solution. How do you end a war that has raged for generations? One act of compassion at a time. One choice to help instead of hurt. One person who drops 40 pounds of gear on a mountain without blinking because a life, any life, is worth more than equipment or career or safety. They had been pioneers of the heart, cartographers of a landscape nobody else believed existed. And though they spent most of their lives in isolation, their love echoed forward through the years, a beacon for others who wanted to believe that enemies could become lovers, that hatred could transform into understanding, that the impossible was simply another word for difficult. In the end, that was their gift to the world. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but a simple, stubborn insistence that love mattered more than fear, that compassion mattered more than hatred, that a single choice to do the right thing could ripple outward in ways nobody could predict. Harrison had left 40 pounds of gear on that mountain without blinking. What he had gained was worth infinitely more.